You know, MTG Foundations looks like it might end up being one of the most beloved sets of the last decade of Magic. And it makes sense. It's got it all, man. It's got the older stuff you love seeing, you're nostalgic for it, but it's also got the brand new stuff, what you've never seen before. What up, Wizards? It's Dev and Igby, he's still down here, and Hero, Hiro, in case you're wondering. We got a big old video to get to today, guys. Hero, you ready? He doesn't care. He's not paying any attention. He's not going to have near as many opinions as Ziggy usually does. But yeah, man, MTG Foundations coming out in just a couple of days in print at this point. And a lot of people are pretty excited. Like I said, it's got just about everything for everybody. A lot of people are completely in love with this set, myself included. But I got to say, kind of a super weird top 25 this time around. There's a lot of strange stuff going on here, and I'll try to explain myself as best I can as I go through. But just a quick couple of rules for this one before I really jump in here. First of all, quickly, no reprints on this entire list because I've already done a top 10 reprints list. In which I talk about like 17 or 18 cards. You know how I am. But I've also already done a top 10 sleepers, underappreciated, under-talked about cards for this set. Links in the description for both of these videos. If you don't see something on this list that you really, really like, it's probably on the sleepers list, especially if it's a specific, like 3 cards. I bet it's in that video instead. So make sure you remember that. But let's go ahead and hop into it. We got a lot to talk about.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back. Make sure you check out the Patreon, link in the description. It's important because it gives me money and I can use that money to buy more bananas. But let's go ahead and get into the honorable mentions here. I got 3 of them this time around, and I don't want to spend too much time on them, but I do want to start with a card that I like more than I should. It's mostly what honorable mentions are for, right? Let's look at High Society Hunter. To kick things off here, there's a lot of cool things I like about this card. First of all, it kind of reminds me of Fallen Angel a little bit, while also reminding me of Midnight Reaper, while also reminding me of my favorite line from Interview with a Vampire.
But the snob in him loved to hunt in society.
Me too, Tom Cruise. I also like Zula Sure. I can't assure you this is a good Magic card. That's all I really have up my sleeve pun-wise for this card, but it's right there. I will say, though, this is a neat little reanimation piece that does not cost too much to get out there, and even though it's restricted to zombies, like, a lot of really good zombies over the course of Magic history, and I should probably go ahead and get this out of the way and maybe not ever say it again in the course of this video, though I'm sure that I will. This video is, this whole list here is meant to encompass all of the formats, right? I like Standard an awful lot, but also Pioneer, Modern, Commander is a big one that everyone plays. So as far as that format goes, I think this is a neat little 2-mana general for your deck that can do an awful lot of cool stuff and is going to be fun to build around, but even all the way up to Standard. I think this might have some work to do depending on what zombies they print. But my last HM over here is Alesha, who is done smiling at death. She's now laughing at fate. No idea what's next for this card. Maybe she's winking at tooth pain. It's a good thing I don't name the cards. This is actually pretty good looking, but I still don't have all the faith in it I think I should have. But we got to look at some of the positives. That's at least half my job. So with that in mind, the card does get you some value the turn that it comes down, and it's pretty easy to engineer that. Even on curve, you know, your opponent refuses to kill one of your guys. What a jerk. You got to kill your own guys over here. So what you do is maybe attack with an NT on turn 3, dump something into your graveyard with the, attacks trigger, and then get that little dude out with your Alesha later on that turn. There's all kinds of ways to discard small fries into your yard and then get them back with Alesha on turn 3 because it's just not that hard to attack on turn 3 in your aggro deck. It's mostly what you're looking to do. So I think Alesha does have some real potential, especially if you do find ways of like untapping with her still in play, alive, ready to attack herself, ready to increase her power again. NT's pretty good at doing that. These two go together like peanut butter and ladies, but one way or the other, this card does, again, have some pretty cool things about it that I think might be powerful enough to make it in Standard. Before we started talking about this card, I'm pretty sure I was on track to beat my honorable mention speedrun record, but can't set a new PB when there's so much to say about Alesha. She seems cool, but let's get on to the actual list here. And start at number 25 with a card that, as soon as I saw it the first time, I wanted to jump its tiny bones. This is a really cool version of this little guy. Hero decided to come back. Now, I just don't have a single bone to pick with this little dude. Discard was looking a little bit skeletal at first, but now it's got some meat on its haunches. This deck is actually looking really good now that it's got yet another discard payoff. It didn't really have that many. And that's not all, as far as like decks this card can go in. You know, got a mono black Skeletons pile cooking up in Standard right now. Death Baron got reprinted, let's kind of go. But there's also a mono black Legends deck that's kind of making the rounds in Standard with Tiny Bones joins up. And just any cheap black Legend goes pretty well in that thing. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with this, and I'm kind of excited to do it all. But my number 24 here is Leyline Axe. This has actually come down a few spots on my list, but I still think this is a pretty good way to chop down some opponents in Standard. Might be the slowest way to cleave Embers that we've ever seen, but Ember Cleave is still a ridiculous Magic card. If you do get it for free, then I'll admit it still costs mana to equip, and mana's a precious resource in this economy. 3 mana, I get that, but it's still, once it's down, it sits there like a doomsday clock, just like constantly ticking down all game, and your opponent's going to have to worry about it eventually, right? Anything you suit up with this, even a 1/1, becomes a pretty formidable threat. So just like random tokens off Fountain Port for the rest of the game becomes sick. Add to all that the fact there just ain't a whole lot of main deck artifact removal in Standard right now, and I think everything from aggro to like somewhat creature-dense mid-range piles could play this to some effect. My number 23 here is Anthem of Champions. Pro tip, hero, have a little queen loaded up on your phone for when you resolve this, but really only do it once. It's only funny the first time, but yeah, just a sweet little 2-mana Anthem effect for all your bros and broettes on your side of the table is actually a really good deal, whether we're talking Standard or Commander. There are plenty of decks in Standard that like to go wide, like Green White Rabbits, I think, might actually really like this. Despite the fact that it's already got an Anthem effect, it probably wants another cheap one, so you got that. But any, like, Selesnya tokens deck in Commander until the end of time, until our grandchildren's grandchildren are playing Commander, is going to want this card. But at number 22, we enter the Planeswalker zone with Chandra over here. Chandra, a lot of people say that she doesn't look like Chandra. My take, from the bottom of my heart, is that I do not care. I look at the text on the Magic card, and I'm like, is that good or not? And oh my god, in this case, I think we got a winner, baby. 7 mana is an awful lot, but I think it's easy enough to get to this fairly in a game of Magic in Standard by like ramping to it or something. And once you do that, you have a one-sided Wrath effect that probably kills all their guys, but mostly, at least all the important ones, and leaves a 2 loyalty Planeswalker on your side of the table. You get to swing it in, you're feeling good about yourself, but there's also a mode on this card that lets you ramp and anticipate in the same mode. That doesn't seem at all dangerous, and yeah, I guess the meat in the sandwich of abilities here is the one that lets you like copy one of your guys. It dies at end of turn, whatever. Maybe you got a good ETB you want to copy. I don't know how you play Magic. It could be really good, but I really like the bun in this sandwich of abilities here. That first ability and that ultimate are just bananas, and I've already established how much I like bananas. So this card looks crazy to me, and I've talked about if you get to it fairly by ramping into it, I think it's good enough. But what if you don't get to it fairly? What if you manifest Dread on turn 2 and then you like splash Portal on turn 3 and get a Chandra? I'm pretty sure there's just like, I think that might be the best thing you can splash Portal into off of manifesting Dread in all of Standard, given what options it gives you right then and there. So hello again, hero. I love you too. But yeah, the card's bonkers. And I'm really kind of resisting the temptation to put this like in my top 5 because it does cost 7 mana, but I think that people are really underestimating this one. But for number 21, we are still in the Planeswalker corner. Why am I talking like that? Number 21 is Kaito, the other new Planeswalker from the set. I will say that this is a weird one for me because I'd much rather Chandra be higher on the list than this, but I have to acknowledge that this cost half of what Chandra cost, actually less than half of what Chandra cost, and in the game of Magic, that kind of means everything. Plus, this is just a good, solid Planeswalker. It has a passive. Chandra doesn't even have a passive. And its passive's pretty sick, too. If you can get through a couple of creatures for combat damage, the loyalty will start stacking up really fast. And if you can get to this ultimate, that just puts ninjas into play whenever people cast spells. You know, that's how broken that is. That could be very good if you ever get to it. But honestly, it's the passive and the first 2 abilities that matter the most on this guy. And I think they're pretty good. Does a little bit of everything besides countering spells that blue actually cares about, right? You know, it's going to loot for you, going to make some dudes, going to get some dudes through unblocked. You know, it's just again, kind of a little bit of everything, and I really like that about Kaito, especially given the cost we're paying for him. Now, my number 20 is a card that I kind of didn't expect to be at number 20. I thought it'd be like an honorable mention, but Abyssal Harvester just keeps like creeping up this list because I'm a little scared of it. Also, for what it's worth, it just kind of has one of the best names in the set. Abyssal Harvester. How metal is that? It's awesome. But anyway, this guy can put any creature into play that went to a graveyard for any reason, which is when you really start thinking about all the reasons why a creature might go to the yard. It's pretty nasty. It's not just milkshakes that bring the boys to the yard. It's also getting milled, getting discarded, getting removed in combat because damage, getting removed because of a single target removal spell, getting removed because of some sort of, sweeper effect that put the creature into the yard. There's a lot of reasons why a creature might hit the yard in this day and age. So if you mill your opponent or make them discard a thing, this will really make them think about what they pitch. But yeah, it's just kind of amazing too against like Reanimator decks. It is a good card for Reanimator decks, don't get me wrong, but also very sick against them because if they go to like reanimate something, you're just like, nah. Oh, you pitched your Valgavoth this turn? Cool. I think nice head. I think I'll take it. Just, Abyssal Harvester looks sweet to me, but it is one of those like 3 drops you have to wait to untap before it can do anything. It dies to cut down. Like there's all kinds of reasons to not like this card in Standard, but I still think it's a little bit dangerous. So I wanted it on my list somewhere. I'm just kind of surprised it's all the way up here at a whole number 20, but this thing's like above Chandra, which I just didn't expect to happen. But here we are. I think the card is actually pretty sick if you can make it work, and that's just it. I don't think you have to jump very high to dunk with this card. It's like when your little cousins are coming over to play basketball, so you set the rim to 7 feet and just start going spud web on them. You know what I mean? Are you old enough to know that reference? Anyway, this is a good Magic card, I think is what I was getting at. What's our next thing? Let's move on to number 19, which is another card I will compare Embercleave to. I'm glad we didn't get Embercleave, but I am glad that we got things like Leyline Axe and, in this case, Twin Blade Blessing. Now, even though this doesn't give trample like the Axe does, I still think that it's kind of better because you don't really have to be afraid of untapped mana against the Axe. It's right there. I see it. But against this, if the opponent has 3 untapped mana, you really got to make sure you're doing your blocks right there, son, because if you let through an even slightly large creature, it's going to kill you right now, right? So you're just going to have to adjust for that math. Against certain decks, especially like blue-white enchantments, this can, even if they play it on a relatively small guy, it can destroy all the ideas you had of what combat was going to be that turn, right? Scavenger puts a +1/+1 counter on a guy now. They draw a card off of Entity Tracker. There's just all kinds of things that in that deck, just an enchantment entering play during combat can completely wreck for you. But when it also makes the guy wearing an ethereal armor hit for, 70, it seems like a pretty good card to me. So beware. I'm telling you right now, this card can do some crazy stuff. Watch out for it. But for number 18, let's look at a guy who will hit you so hard, he'll put you in a coma over here. Coma is the name of the card. Coma the World Eater. Now, I was told that Bray Wyatt was the Eater of Worlds, so someone's lying. Although, in that hypothetical dream match, I think my money is on Coma. This card is ridiculous, man. Uncounterable and hits to put 12 more power back into play. That's nuts. I mean, I'm pretty sure the argument from the spikes here is going to be that, like, if you are being attacked by a 7 mana, 8 power creature, you're probably already losing the game. I would imagine that's how they usually think, right? But in this day and age's Magic, I'm just not sure that's quite true. You can actually get hit by an 8-powered dude and still survive if you draw the removal spell, but Coma makes sure that that's not going to happen. There's also like push-pull, which works really well with this because you pull it out of your yard along with something else. Who knows what other monsters you got in there. And then when it swings in, you'll end up with 12 power. Coma's going to die at end of turn. Who cares? You get 12 power on 4 guys. Seems like a pretty good deal for your push-pull for your 6 mana. I would pay 6 mana for 12 power on 4 guys. Getting an attack step with an 8/12 trample seems like just a bonus in that case. And something else. Push-pull looks really good with this, but, despite all that, the card is just sick in a vacuum, goes really well, against control decks and stuff, so card definitely has a life ahead of it, especially given it's got half a decade to do something. But number 17 here is another uncounterable and kind of expensive blue creature. I figured I'd put these one after the other, though I do think this one is probably just better than Coma in a lot of ways. It's Curator of Destinies. Now, this was almost on my sleepers list, but of all the players who are talking about this, it's mostly the spikes. They seem to be wise to it, from what I can tell, which shows that the Spike community is healing slightly. Maybe 6-drops can be playable, especially when you're guaranteed to resolve them, and they always put like 3 or 4 cards into your hand. If nothing else, I think this is a really good mirror-breaking card against control decks. If you're a control deck, again, you're guaranteed to resolve the thing, and it's going to put a bunch of cards into your hand. In a way, it kind of makes me think, and this is what makes me like the card the most, it makes me think of an Atraxa backed up by a Cavern of Souls, but you don't have to have the Cavern in play or anything. The card is just always guaranteed to resolve. And once it does, sure, your opponent might just remove it or whatever, but what are they going to do about the like 3 or 4 cards it put into your hand, just like Atraxa? But unlike Atraxa, the card is really easy to cast, a whole mana cheaper than Atraxa, which does matter. And it's like more copyable. It's not legendary is what I'm getting at. You can actually have more than one copy in play at the same time attacking, which is ridiculous. So I think this card really does have a future, especially when cards like Atraxa rotate out, but I don't even think the card has to wait for that. I think the card is just good day one. But for number 16, I'm scrawling in my sins. These wounds, they will not heal. And by these wounds, I mean all the freaking damage this thing can do to your opponent, man. Like, we didn't think we were going to have Underworld Dreams in Standard, but then it comes scrawling back, Just at this point, I'm thinking, along with, what is it, Razorkin Needlehead and Sheldred in Standard, we've got a critical mass of cards to build a deck and make sure our opponent never wants to draw another card again. For the longest time now, it's been said that drawing a card is like the single best game action you can take in Magic the Gathering, and I guess the designers heard that a few years ago and decided to ask us to hold their beer. Like, they have just made a bunch of sort of Underworld Dreams, right, variants over the last couple of years, and some of them are... all of them so far are very good. Razorkin Needlehead see and play in older formats, all the way back to Legacy in some cases, and Sheldred, that's a good, I hate that thing. So, Scrawling Trawler looks like the kind of card that, like, even though it's giving cards to your opponent, it's also giving cards to you, which I shouldn't have to tell you, that's good. It's like a Howling Mine that they stapled to an Underworld Dreams, and any deck is allowed to play it because it's, an artifact, any mana can cast it. And that just seems nuts to having fought for 5 years. 5 years of this card, man. Maybe the symmetrical effect on it, drawing both players' cards, is not good, but I have a feeling that it's super breakable. So get ready for this card in Standard, man, especially considering we already have it on, other cards. This is like copies, 8 through 12 of this effect that you can play. So it seems like you can put together something not only competitive, but also just like really mean-spirited. But for number 15, I am feeling the Valkyrie's Call over here, man. It's kind of like a luminous Broodmoth with no legs. Broodmoth is this on legs. So this is like a luminous Broodmoth with 6 fewer legs. But in a way, that's good. Like, go for the throat or whatever. It's like a Doomblade effect, kills a luminous Broodmoth. That you don't have to worry about with this, there's a lot fewer actual main deck effects that kill this, but I'm mostly looking at this card for Commander. I think it's going to shine there. And almost nowhere else, but I do think that some of us content creators are going to try to light the card up for content, because people might want to see what the card does, but I don't think that it has much of a competitive future ahead of it. But I do also kind of hope the card surprises me, because this is exactly the kind of effect that I like. But every now and again, a card's just good enough in Commander that you have to give it like some flowers, and I think that Valkyrie's Call definitely deserves like all the petunias, man. You're a pretty good looking card, but I think you're a trap in Standard. Please prove me wrong. Anyway, we got to move on here. Looking down on my list, that's professional. Number 14. This is why I couldn't remember what number 14 is, because it keeps creeping up. This card keeps creeping up my list too. It's Loot Exuberant Explorer. Now, the first ability on this card is just kind of always good in Standard. Like 3 mana, play an extra land during your turn. Sure, Mr. Butcher Man. Sure, Mr. Baker Man. Wrap it up. I will take it home and cook it. But aside from that, the activated ability, even though it's kind of expensive, is still insane. I was trying to I was going through the Rolodex there, what's the apt term for this? How do I correctly describe how ridiculous this ability actually is? 6 mana, again, seems kind of steep, but later in the game, this can get anything off the top of your deck and just throw it right into play, which is unconscionable, and it is not too hard to ramp lands into play, especially given that this card just lets you do that too. But, when you think about all these Aftermath Analyst and Lumbra decks that get 1 million lands into play, you know, or these Teamer Doppelgang decks. Have you seen those? Have you heard about those on the arena that put like 12 lands into play very easily? They Doppelgang their own lands and just ramp like nuts. So like a card like this actually looks like it can just be tapped at instant speed to put like anything you want to from the top million cards of your deck or whatever into play. And that seems like it's probably more playable than like, I don't know, spelunking. Let's move on to number 13 here, which I feel like tricked me, but that's only apropos because it's High Fade Trickster. This is another one where it's like, I've rewritten this list 4 or 5 times, which is actually fewer times than I normally rewrite these lists, which is good for me and my sanity. But I keep expecting that this card will end up like number 20 or 19, you know, somewhere along those lines. And it keeps just making its way up because I keep thinking as soon as I want to write it at number 18, it looks at me and it's like, but Dev, I do cool stuff. Don't you? Well, come on, man. And I'm like, oh yeah, you really do. You do cool stuff. So, you know, it's all the way up here at number 13 now. Now, I don't love the 2 toughness on a 4-drop creature. I guess I should probably point out the bad thing, but that's because it's like the only bad thing. The real reason it's all the way up here, though, I think, is that it's another one of those cards that's just good in Standard, maybe, and good in Commander, probably, you know, and when you're good in the 2 most popular... Is that a controversial thing to say? The 2 most popular formats, right? Standard is the most popular format played digitally, and then Commander is the most popular format played in paper. I don't think that's a controversial statement. When you're good in both of them, you probably deserve some amount of praise, and I think this card does, you know. In Standard, I think there's some setups that might matter with it, but once we get to Commander, boy, I think that you're going to have all the fun in the world. Even if it's just kind of redundant with some other quicken effects that already exist, this will help your fun deck that you want to do the cool stuff with, do the cool stuff a whole lot more consistently. But my number 12 is one of the cards that I am personally the most excited about in this set. It's Raise the Past. Every time a new set gets printed, I feel like I say, hey, this is the piece Aristocrats has been waiting on. Sacrifice decks for the uninitiated. Decks where you want to sack dudes and stuff. And this is amazing for those decks for a couple of reasons, right? You know, sometimes you'll play your Elysal Core or your Vron or your other Blood Artist effect we'll get to later that's in this set and also in this video, just teasing a little bit there. There's a lot of like small-ish dudes with very low power that you have to have in place to be doing anything, really. It's just good that this puts all of your pieces into place so you can start doing aristocrat things again. But what it also does is if you already have your aristocrat pieces in place, you can sack this guy to Bartolome, sack this guy to Bartolome, sack this guy to Bartolome, get some triggers off of Elysal Core, get some trigger off of Vron, whatever you're doing, and then just raise the past, bring all those guys back, sack them all to Vron again, and get more Elysal Core triggers and finish the game off that way. Aristocrats has used cards like this many times in the past to actually give themselves either, you know, the resilience they need to keep bodies on the table, or the bodies they need to deal that last, you know, finishing blow, that elbow drop in death triggers that they need to put the game away. This card does both of those things at a pretty efficient rate, honestly. So if you can't tell by how much I'm yammering on about it, I'm very excited to have this card for one specific deck, but I actually think it does things for more than my pet deck. Just, you know, any aggro deck that can fit something like this might want to play it, if not the board, if nowhere else. But again, I think that there's plenty of like little creature combo decks that might utilize this very well. Now, number 11 is, as I usually say, an honorable mention for the top 10, and this time around, it's Zimone Paradox Sculptor. Yeah, I know a good Simic 4-drop is a bit of a paradox, but I think we actually have one here. Now, I think there's any number of cards that we've already covered that I was very tempted to put above this card, but I'm taking a big swing here. I actually think there is a lot to this. You get 2, like, Luminar Caspant or fight rigging effects, you know, every single turn. And it does it the turn it comes into play. So if you want to say this is a 4-mana do nothing, that knocks that argument right out. You know, you get a body and a couple of +1/+1 counters on guys. But once you can actually use the activated ability, things can get out of control very quickly, man. Like, obviously, it's putting counters on stuff, and that makes its activated ability better. But there's about 1 million ways to put counters on stuff for relatively cheaply and good cards. You don't have to play any bad cards in a +1/+1 counter deck nowadays. So I think this actually has some real steez, man. And also, one more thing, let me say this one more time during Foundations preview season, Agatha's Soul Cauldron is a card that exists, so, even if this does end up in your graveyard, you can still pass around that activated ability and start doing really dangerous things, Like, I think this card actually has a few spots it can go into, but even outside of like a specific synergy in a combo deck or a +1/+1 counter deck, I think it's just a solid Magic card in mid-range decks that play a fair number of creatures. Well, let's start the top 10, everybody. Number 10 is Bloodthirsty Conqueror, who, at the beginning of the video, I told you this is a weird top 25. I don't know if you guys are going to talk to me again after this, but Bloodthirsty Conqueror did in fact somehow make his way all the way up here, and I think that's because I'm very excited about it, but it's also because it is undeniably a great commander effect. I think this might be like the commander card, well, maybe not, of the top 10. There's a couple of them in the top 10. But as far as commander cards for the set go, I think this is like in the top 3, just amazing for commander. It's, redundancy with your Exquisite Blood, and Exquisite Blood is what, like a $10 or $20 card at this point. It's kind of hard to get your hands on because of all the ridiculous infinite combos you can do with it. And porting the card over to standard, we can actually get those infinite combos off and gain some life and effectively kill our opponent because we gained life thanks to this card. So I'm not sure the black-white life gain decks as they're built right now want to play a 5-drop, but if they ever did, this is the one they'd want to play. But I feel you don't want the whole top 10 to be like commander cards and commander cards only, even though I do think I presented a pretty good case for the card in standard. But okay, you want to see wonky, spiky stuff. All right, number 9 is Crystal Barricade. It's a very good Magic card. Of all the cards that are probably mostly sideboard cards in this set, and there's a good number of them, I think Barricade is the best, but I also think this isn't strictly a sideboard playable card. I think there are plenty of decks that might want at least a couple of copies of this in the main deck, especially depending on how the format begins to develop here in the early weeks. Now, obviously, this is a counter against the Burn decks, and I think Burn is a real deck. We got Boros Charm, we got that new Lava Spike, we already have, Lightning Helix, we got Burst Lightning, we got a bunch of different good Burn spells in Standard, so this is good against those. That's the obvious, third grader analysis. But you know what else targets? Discard decks. We were talking earlier about Tiny Bones and it maybe making the discard decks even better than they already are, and I mean, you play against discard 3 times a day on Arena already, don't you? I do. So anything that makes those decks better is kind of scary. But again, most discard effects tend to be targeted at an opponent. So this will keep you from having to pitch cards, which I really like. But number 8, I guess we'll get back to the commander stuff. It's Twinflame Tyrant, which I think is another one of the better commander cards in the entire set. But just like the last mostly commander 5-drop we looked at in the top 10, I think I should pitch this card in standard just a little bit. There are a few things you can do. I actually do kind of think this would be a fun 5-drop creature to play in a burn deck, but maybe don't do that. Also, in a Dragons deck, this is a fun 5-drop, but maybe don't do that. I'm going to bring up Push-Pull one more time, but maybe do that, doo-doo. Anyway, if you cast Push-Pull on this and get this and something else out of your graveyard, then I think that probably sets up more one-turn kills than any other card in the entire format. And there's, Calamity's in this format, Aurelia's in this set. There's a lot of, Terror of Mount Velis is in this set, which is kind of comparable to this, but not as good, so, there's a fair number of OTKs available to you in standard. But again, I think that this one, along with not just Push-Pull, but some other reanimator setups are for instance, Smuggler's Surprise and something that gives your guys haste, there's a couple of ways to just completely blow out an opponent, and they did not at all see that coming. And I think that when you see a card with this much one-turn kill potential, you probably your ears need to prick up just slightly, even despite the mana cost. Yeah, it's 5 mana. When will you ever pay 5 mana for this if you're doing it right? 0% of the time is the answer. But even if all those standard options I named don't really pan out for it, still commander playable until more or less the end of time. So let's move on to number 7 here, which is a card that I called maybe the most overrated card in the entire set. My number 1 most overrated card when I talked to a friend of the channel, Power Dragon, whose channel you really should check out. Watch his content when you're not watching me. You should spend all of your time watching one or the other of our channels. But anyway, It's Herald of Eternal Dawn, guys. Now, just because I think a card is overrated does not mean I think it's bad, and this is the perfect example. Now, Flash on a Platinum Angel is a balls-out call-out, so get your wallet out. I think we will see this thing at some point in Standard. Now, this is another one of those where, like, the potential Commander playability is doing a lot of heavy lifting for the card, you know, because I do think there's more than just some potential Commander playability. I think there's some certain Commander playability in its future, but apart from that, I do think this is a standard playable Magic card. I've already outlined all the myriad ways you can get to a 7-drop creature without having to actually fairly pay for it. So, you know, there's like 10 ways of doing that in Standard right now. That's pretty sick. This is another awesome creature, by the way, to manifest Dread and then turn up or splash portal or whatever at the exact right moment when you would otherwise lose the game. That seems like a fun way to spend a Friday night. If you can actually like protect this the turn it comes down somehow, then you probably just annoy your opponent out of existence. In case you've never played against or with a Platinum Angel before, a Platinum Angel with like a counterspell backup is a one game of Magic. You have won that game, and so I think introducing that dynamic to Standard is actually, I've used this word a few times in this video, but kind of a little bit dangerous, you know? I know this just dies to, like, you know, go for the throat and get lost, and that's the biggest downside of the card. But again, there are plenty of ways of protecting it once it's out, and then what are you going to do? Jack, you're going to lose that game. So, you know, I'm a little bit terrified. I'm slightly scared of this. I've got some pretty horrific experiences against Platinum Angel in the past, and I can only imagine that if my opponent could have flashed in the Platinum Angel, that at this point, I probably still would not still be playing Magic if they could have done that. So we'll see about a couple of years from now. Number 6 is possibly the dumbest card in the entire set, and I mean that in every way I can mean dumb. I guess both the good and the bad ways. Rite of the Dragon Caller really hits both of them really hard, you know what I mean? Like, this is probably like the Commander card from the set. If I had to guess, this would be like my number one if I was going to do a Commander only list, because geez Louise, macaroni and cheese, dude. You get this thing into play, and then what are you going to have, like 7 dragons that turn? You know, like I said earlier, there are a ton, like an actual 2,000 pounds worth of like 6 and 7 mana outrageous like enchantments that win you the game when they come into play in this set. And this is probably my favorite of all of them, period. Just that line of text is probably taken in a vacuum when you don't look at mana costs or anything like that. I think this line of text is the craziest, nuttiest, most broken line of text in the entire set, and the only line of text the card needs. And that's how you know it's busted. I'm not really sure what to expect from this card in Standard, but it's like $20 to order on pre-sale right now on TCG Player, one of the more expensive cards in the set. And I actually don't expect that price to come down anytime soon, just given how gnarly this actually is in everyone's favorite format. Now, number 5, I'm going to go ahead and warn you, is the last card in the top 10 where I'm going to have to say the word Commander a bunch of times as I describe the function of the card to you, but it is also the Commander card from the top 10, because I know there's been a bunch, but it is the Commander card from the top 10 that I think has the highest chance of seeing play in Standard. Place your bets. It's Banner of Kinship. It's like a coat of arms thing. It's not a reprint. In some cases, I think it's better than Coat of Arms. In some cases, right? Coat of Arms is always like counting how many of a creature you have, which, by the way, is really annoying to have to keep track of if you're anyone at the table, including the person playing Coat of Arms. But when it comes to Banner, it just like comes into play and locks in a certain, you know, anthem bonus for all of those guys, which I think is just a way easier to track, but still in some cases better because, you know, you have a Coat of Arms out, they wrath your elves. Coat of Arms means nothing. But, you know, if you played this onto a board that had 5 or 6 elves, then suddenly, like, every elf you play for the rest of the game is, like, at least a 7/7, even if they sweep your board. And I think that's just kind of, again, just, like, better in a lot of situations. But in Standard, I think this has a real chance of being, like, kind of the kill spell. Like, again, the finishing move, the sharpshooter in what are your favorite finishing move? The Razor's Edge. It's my favorite finishing move. In, you know, an Elves deck. People have talked about Lathril, which I think we'll see play. People have talked about playing Overrun in the Elves deck, which I think is actually really smart, but Banner of Kinship is very likely going to be the true actual figure 4 leg lock for that deck. And did I mention it's Commander playable? Oh yeah, I did. Good. That means I don't have to talk too much more about it. It's just Banner is a very exciting Magic card, but number 4 is... Number 4 is the exact opposite. If you were looking for a card like this, if you're looking at this top 10 and you're like, man, there's a lot of commander stuff on here, it's dumb. Number 4 is a card that I guess you can play as your commander, but I don't expect it to see near as much commander play as I do standard play. It's a Linda. The Scion of Dusk over here has protection from instants. In case you have no idea how busted that is, basically every card that kills a creature in standard is an instant. I guess there's Sunfall, and on occasion you'll see like Lay Down Arms, right? There are sometimes sorcery speed removal spells, but for the most part, it's like Get Lost and Go for the Throats and stuff like that. So it's going to be really difficult to get rid of this sometimes 4/4, sometimes much larger than that life-linking creature. To be honest, I actually don't even care that much about like the extra text on a Linda. If you have this much life, she's a little bit bigger. If you have this much life, she's way bigger. Like those are cool lines of text, don't get me wrong. And I will also point out here that like she helps herself get to those benchmarks. She has the lifelink. She's hitting for a good amount of damage at one time. So if she hits for a couple of turns, you'll probably hit one of these marks and she'll get a little bit larger. But at that point, you're probably winning anyway because you've hit consecutive turns with a 4-power lifelink thing. So it seems like good news for you one way or the other. But still, I think that even without all that extra text, just having a 4-mana, 4-power lifelinking, very hard to kill lady is probably good enough for a lot of mid-range decks in standard. But let's get to my top 3, everybody. And this is the weirdest top 3 that I've ever done. There are no rares or mythics in this top 3. It's all lower rarity stuff this time around. And I really feel like you guys are going to be like, what, Dev? At some of these, but I think that there are actual reasons, and not just me being an idiot to make these my top 3 cards. Number 3 is Hinterland Sanctifier. Now this is just another soul sister, like a soul warden or a soul's attendant, or most closely related, I think, to a Lunarch veteran, but that's a really, really good Magic card that, first of all, stopping off in Standard to begin with, Standard has really missed, or at least one deck in Standard has really missed Lunarch Veteran. We already have Case of the Uneaten Feast, but that's the only 1-mana version of this effect that we had until now. So now we have 8 versions of that effect we can play in one deck and get this particular incredibly important line of text online as early as turn 1. I think it's going to make those decks much, much better. But even outside of Standard, I should say this is Pioneer and even Modern playable. Another sister for those decks is always good. But even as far back, you go to Commander, and I think the card's going to see a lot of play forever because, again, it's another copy of Soul Warden, Soul's Attendant, Lunarch Veteran. You now have at least 4 of these 1-mana guys that do this you can play in Commander. That's going to be important for those life gain decks too. So I think that maybe they can stop printing Soul Wardens at this point. For 1 mana, I think we've got enough, but just about every format that carries a life gain deck probably will play some number of this card. I'm not sure that a Modern deck wants more copies of Soul Warden in the 1-drop slot, but then again, it might. You never know. Plus, one more thing, back to Standard, outside of just dedicated black-white life gain decks, is actually kind of good for green-white rabbits. It's really hard to say. It's good for wabbits. Because, this comes down on turn 1, and then when you hop to it, you gain 3 life. Anytime you get a bunch of rabbit tokens, Carrot Cake, whatever, gains you a bunch more life off Carrot Cake. So, I don't know. It could be decent in those decks, too. It's just got a lot of places to be. It's got plenty of very important dates. My number 2 is Lava Spike over here. They didn't reprint Lava Spike? I heard they reprinted Lava Spike. Oh, it's Bolt Wave. They're calling it Bolt Wave now. So now Modern Burn gets 12 1-mana bolts that can go to the face. That seems cool, which is one of the big reasons why this card is all the way up here at number 2. I can't promise you Hinterland Sanctifier is going to see Modern play or make Soul Sisters better, but this makes Modern Burn way better than it already was, and it was already pretty good. I just think it definitely goes there, which means it could probably go in Pioneer Burn as well, and I think most importantly for this exercise, Standard Burn. I think that this makes Standard Burn, along with Boros Charm. We got one reprint and one new card in this set that makes standard burn a reality for the first time in what feels like a very long time. I think a lot of us, myself included, thought that this might be the set. If they were ever going to reprint Lightning Bolt in the standard, this would be the one they pull the trigger on. Did we all want Lightning Bolt in standard for 5 years? I'm not sure, but did we want to find out if we wanted that? Yes, I wanted to find out if I wanted that, because sometimes I don't know. Sometimes a person does not know what they want, and they need to be taught. So I'll say this, we didn't get Bolt. I'll take this. It's kind of the next best thing we could have gotten. Again, they also gave us like Burst Lightning and Boros Charm. There's plenty of good burn spells in this set. They didn't have to reprint Lightning Bolt to make me happy, and they didn't reprint Lightning Bolt, and lo and behold, I'm happy. This card looks amazing to me. But we are at my number one. I teased it earlier, and you probably thought you would have seen it by now on the list. Is Dev really going to make this card number one? Yeah. Yes, I really am going to make Vengeful Bloodfit Witch my number one. I can't say that I've been this excited about a new standard playable Magic card in like a couple of years. I don't know, man. Like, when did War Leader's Call come out? Like a year ago, so I was really excited about War Leader's Call. Really excited. I think I'm way more excited about this than I ever was about Call, so I should really tell you something. You know how I went on that whole screed about Aristocrats decks earlier? Now you know what an Aristocrat deck is, so I can just say that instead of having to be like, what's like a sacrifice deck where you sacrifice? Aristocrats deck. I really like my favorite kind of deck. And so far, over the last few years, Standard has had a bunch of pieces just kind of jumbled together. You got this whole tub full of Legos. Absolutely no directions, but sometimes you got to get in there like a real Lego master and make something of all of this mess. But I just don't think we've had the proper pieces. Because you know what? You can get Season of Loss in one of the sets, and I'm like, that's a good Aristocrats card. That's sexy. In this set, you can get Raise the Pass, and I'm like, that's a pretty good Aristocrats card. What you need for Aristocrats is 2-mana guys that have this exact line of text. But it's apart from my excitement here. I'm trying to be a little bit objective too, and I think that you can make the argument the card deserves the number one spot, not just because I think it's playable and like finally makes Orzhov Aristocrats a thing. Could make Rakdos Aristocrats a thing in Standard too. That's a deck that's been looking for a piece like this as well. But Pioneer has a Vampires deck that plays like Vein Ripper and won a Pro Tour last year. And this is a 2-drop Vampire that it just so happens goes insanely well in that deck. So we could see this drop into one of the better decks in Pioneer day one as well. And one last Commander argument here, just like Hinterland Sanctifier is another copy of Soul Warden or, cards like it, Soul's Attendant, Lunarch Veteran. This over here is another copy of Ellis Ilkor or Judith. Again, if you're in black-red, it's another copy of Mayhem Devil in those decks. Another copy of Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat, Marionette. There's there's a bunch of cards that this is just another redundant copy of. And just like in standard decks, at the end of the day, Commander Aristocrats decks have a bunch of different cards that, this gets a guy back from the graveyard and this kills a creature or whatever. But like the number one thing you're most worried about is having as many Blood Artist effects as possible. And this is yet another one of them for Commander as well. So I just think this has like potential relevance in like literally every format. Like it's possible at least. So I don't know, man. And it's worth noting too that in Commander, this is not as good as like a Zulaport Cutthroat because Cutthroat deals it to each opponent. But in Standard, this deals it to a target opponent when one of your guys dies, which sure on the arena is going to be kind of annoying to click through the triggers, but note that it commits a crime by targeting one of your opponents, which might be important for some other decks too. There's a lot of cool things about this card. Obviously, it's a Blood Artist. In case you've never experienced a Blood Artist, there are many very cool things about it. But that is all for my top 25. There's some cards I wanted to give shout outs to, like Helpful Hunter, a new like Elvish Visionary, but it's a cat. It's actually more of a new Spirited Companion, but it's not an enchantment. Still, I don't get it's a cat that draws you a card, only costs a couple mana. That actually seems like a playable Magic card, and I like its Kitty Cat. But apart from that, there's a ton of cards I could have mentioned. This probably could have been a top 50 list. So again, if there's something that you really liked from the set you didn't see on the list, first check the Sleepers video. It might be over there, but if it's not there, maybe leave your comment down there. But with that, I think we're officially donezo for this onezo, and that is Allski Kowalski. But there's still a bunch of content I have to put out about this set. A lot remains to be said, and in the next week, we're going to have to put out like the top 3 new decks once the set is legal in standard. There's a ton of stuff to look forward to. So make sure you sub to the sandwich, get yourself some meatballs and all that. You can hit the button shaped like a thumb on your way out. That'll put me in more people's recommended. I'd appreciate that. And if you really felt like it, if you really want me to continue being a YouTuber, I'd like to. You can check out the link to Patreon in the description. Only $1 a month is all I really ask, and that'll give you access to polls so you can like help pick what decks we do first this season. But anyway, that is Itsky Lewitsky. I got to get out of here, so I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind. Say bye, hero. You're sleepy. You're not going to say bye to anybody. He's always so sleepy. He's a good guy.